live in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Actionable Intelligence. I'm Eric Greitens. I'm honored to be with you tonight, and as always, we've got a big show lined up for you, so let's get right after it. Today, President Donald Trump announced that Sudan is going to start to normalize ties with Israel, making it the third Arab state to do so as part of a U.S.-brokered peace deal in the run-up to Election Day. Now, in recent weeks, the White House oversaw normalization agreements between Israel and both the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. As you'll remember, those agreements were called the Abraham Accords. Now, to put this in perspective, it's important to remember that it's been over a quarter of a century since another Arab country normalized relations with Israel. And the president suggested that other nations might follow suit. The move delivers another foreign policy achievement for the president just days before the United States election. And the deal with Sudan is going to include aid and investment from Israel, particularly in technology and agriculture. The agriculture investment is significant because, as you may know, Israel is one of the world's leaders in significant areas of agricultural technology, especially as regards water use. And part of the agreement also includes Sudan depositing $335 million into an account to pay compensation to victims of the 1998 bombings of the United States embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. Now, I promised you that we'd bring you people with strong voices who, like me, respect your intelligence. And I'm really happy to welcome one of the most thoughtful, respected, substantial radio talk show hosts in the country. He's an expert on the topic of Israel and Jewish history. He happens to be one of my favorite people in the world to talk with and to learn from. Joining us now, folks, is Dennis Prager, host of The Dennis Prager Show. Now, Dennis, I'm going to ask you to put these accords in historical perspective. And before I do, let me share with the audience that you've written some very powerful books on the book of Genesis, on the book of Exodus. So when I ask you to put this in historical perspective, you're coming with the view that it's both broad and deep. But what do these agreements mean for America and for Israel?
Well, first of all, let me just say what a joy it is to be with you. You're one of my favorite people as well. So,
thank you.
Without entering this mutual adulation, but it is true.
Thank you.
So let me tell you, it almost cannot be overstated in its significance. I never would have thought Sudan would have been one of the first. UAE is remarkable, Bahrain is remarkable, but Sudan was a place where bin Laden lived. Sudan has been a major fomenter of Islamist extremism. And for them to recognize the existence of the Jewish state, all of this has been made possible by President Trump. What President Trump did, especially by moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, was to state the Palestinians will no longer have a veto over what happens in the Middle East. Everybody was afraid of the Palestinians. Donald Trump is afraid of no one. He might be a little afraid of Melania, but there's no way to know. But that would be it. That would be the extent. That is why he is worthy of respect. The man doesn't fear what the world will say. As I have often said, world opinion is utterly and totally worthless. World opinion did nothing for Jews in the Holocaust, did nothing for Armenians in their genocide, did nothing for the 80 million Chinese starved by Mao, did nothing for the Ukrainians under Stalin. World opinion is completely worthless. Donald Trump knows it. The left does not. The left genuflects before world opinion. That is what matters to them. How are we regarded by Le Monde or the New York Times matters to them. It doesn't matter to Donald Trump. So he single-handedly removed the veto, psychological and political, of the Palestinians over what happens in the Middle East. That's why this happened.
Yeah, and let's also, as we continue to kind of look at this from historical perspective, right? American presidents have, ever since Harry Truman, 11 minutes after David Ben-Gurion made his announcement announcing the State of Israel, Harry Truman came in, the United States recognized the State of Israel. American presidents have played a really important role in securing and advancing peace in the Middle East and maintaining the security of Israel From the perspective of history, how would you rank President Trump's legacy in this first term in terms of what he's done for the state of Israel as compared with other presidents?
I believe that Harry Truman is the other equivalent. I would say, interestingly, and I'm not a fan of Richard Nixon, as it happens. Nevertheless, truth is truth. Moshe Dayan, the world famous Secretary of Defense, or Minister of Defense in Israel during the Yom Kippur War, said the arms that we use in the afternoon to save Israel were sent in the morning by Richard Nixon. And by the way, Nixon did this against the advice of his Jewish Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. Just as Truman did it against the entire State Department, the recognition of Israel, and Trump did it against the entire U.S. establishment. These people, Nixon, Truman, and Trump, all acted against the universal advice of the American establishment.
And let's talk about that for a little bit, because as you point out, not only Nixon did it, Truman did it. I mean, Truman's own Secretary of State, George Marshall, was vehemently against Truman making this move. Donald Trump had the entire mainstream media, the entire foreign policy establishment was against him. Let's talk about why it is that for so long the foreign policy establishment has historically stood against and been a counter to presidents who've made these bold moves on behalf of Israel.
It's a very tough call. This is one man's theory. The State Department, I think numbers actually answers it. How many Arab countries are there? How many Jewish countries are there? There's one Jewish country. There are 23 Arab countries, 56 Muslim countries. So think just of the number of people in the State Department who identify with Arab and with Muslim countries versus the number that have any identification with the one Jewish country. The ratio is like 50-1. So that, believe it or not, without even any nefarious explanation, helps explain it. When you're stationed in a country, overwhelmingly, you end up seeing the world in large measure through their eyes more than even through America's eyes. It's inevitable. You're a human being. If you're in France for 5 years, you identify with the French. It makes perfect sense.
Well, Dennis, we really appreciate you being with us. Right before we go to break, and I know you're going to stay with us afterwards, what do you think, and then in 20 seconds or less, what's next on President Trump's agenda for the state of Israel and the U.S. relationship?
It seems to me that we have here a sort of avalanche, the beginning of an avalanche. When you have, some snowballs going down and then picking up more. If Sudan does this with the credentials
Dennis, let's pick up on that in just 1 second right after this break. Folks, stay with us with Dennis Prager. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Actionable Intelligence. I'm Eric Greitens, and we continue our conversation with Dennis Prager, one of the most respected radio hosts in the country, president and founder of Prager University. Dennis, before the break, you were talking about how with these agreements with Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, with Sudan, that a really positive avalanche might have been started. Go ahead and finish your thought on that.
Well, the more Arab and Muslim countries that say we're okay with a Jewish state in the Middle East, the more public opinion can accept it. It's hardest to be the first. It's hardest to be the first to do a bad thing. It's hardest to be the first to do a good thing. People don't like to take risks. But once the bad thing or the good thing is done, more will do it. That's the reason on the bad side, that is the reason for the broken windows theory. That famous idea that if the police and society allow broken windows and graffiti to go unanswered, you'll ultimately end up with robbery, and then ultimately with rape, and then ultimately with murder. It's hard to start, but once you start, it's like the riots. If I see that they riot in Portland and get away with it, then I'll riot in Chicago and get away with it. Same with good things. If you stick your neck out and do a good thing, that's why I tell people who have traditional American values, Judeo-Christian values, etc., if you stick your neck out, you will be shocked at how many will join you. Yes. It's very hard, though, to be the first. So in the Arab world, it's just a normal thing in human nature. Now that more have done it, and Sudan, I mean, that's really something. This is a huge victory. So that's why I think it will begin an avalanche.
And Dennis, you touched on the riots. Let's shift gear a little bit from kind of looking overseas to looking back here at home. I encourage everybody to go out to DennisPrager.com to check out some of your columns. You've had two recently that I thought were really important. One, you wrote about the fact that civilization is fragile. And you also, I think, related column talking about how America is drowning in the lies of the left. Talk with us for a moment about where we're at culturally right now in the United States.
America has been different and better only because of its values. There's nothing inherently better about Americans than any other group. What distinguishes America and has made it exceptional, that's why so many people in the world want to come here, has been its values. And we are one generation away, as Ronald Reagan said, of losing them. I'll give you an example that nobody thinks of. The vast majority of people who ever think about it believe that it is instinctive to humans to yearn for freedom. It is not true. Liberty is a value, not an instinct. The human instinct is to be taken care of, not to be free. People do not yearn to be free. So that's why, by the way, we have a Liberty Bell. If it were instinctive, there's no breathing bell. We breathe instinctively. Yes. There's no sex bell. We have sex instinctively. But there's a Liberty Bell because that's not instinctive. That's a value. Sex is not a value, and breathing is not a value, and eating is not a value. Excuse me. Those are all instincts. But liberty, that must be taught. Give me liberty or give me death is a value. Yes. So the left never, incredibly, my major was leftism. Very few people, it worked out extraordinarily valuably in my life. I was at the Russian Institute at Columbia University in graduate school. I studied communism and communist affairs. That was my field of expertise. I know the left. Since Lenin until Soros, there has never been a value on liberty. Freedom is not a left-wing value. Right. Social justice is a left-wing value, theoretically. Right. Justice is not, social justice is. There's a huge difference. That's the reason they added an adjective. But not liberty. And wherever the left gains power, it suppresses free speech, like the college.
Well, I want to pick up on two things that you mentioned there, Dennis. One is, you talked about President Reagan. One of the things that he made clear, and a lot of people have throughout American history, is that value of freedom has to be reaffirmed and has to be fought for in every generation. I grew up in a world where I remembered the Cold War. I remembered the fall of the Berlin Wall. A lot of young people who are out rioting in the streets, they don't remember the Cold War. They have no instinctive recollection of what communism meant, of what socialism is. In Still the Best Hope, you wrote a lot about what actually happened under communism. Let's talk a little bit about the true legacy of communism and the fight that Americans have to wage in this generation to maintain the value of freedom.
You made my day telling me you read Still the Best Hope. I just want to say to your viewers, I think it's the best book explaining the left, America, and Islam in one volume. Yes. So Still the Best Hope. The left is the largest part. I have a video out of PragerU 5-minute video. Why isn't communism as hated as Nazism? This has puzzled me since I was a kid, and I obviously hate Nazism as a human, as an American, as a Jew. I hate it. It's the apotheosis of evil. But communism killed far more people. And maybe if Hitler had more time, he'd have caught up. But I don't think you can catch up to the communists. 60 to 80 million in China, 20 to 40 million in the Soviet Union.
Dennis, you've got about 20 seconds. Please
the
keep going,
deliberate
sir.
genocide of Ukrainians. The ignorance of communism is as awful as ignorance of Nazism.
Yes. Well, folks, I want to make sure that you get a chance. Go out to Prager University. Take a look at all of the videos that are out there. I've learned a lot from them. Please do check out Still the Best Hope. And if you're like me, you'll actually have a whole Dennis Prager bookshelf there. Dennis, we're so grateful to have you on. Thank you for the historical insight, the insight into the culture. We appreciate it. And folks, when we come back, we're going to be moving to our SITREP, our situation report, where we're going to be going through the most important stories of the day, why they matter to you and to your family. Stay with us right here at Actionable Intelligence. We're going to be right back.